Welcome to the Embrace Your Life podcast, the place to be, to live authentically, and simply embracing your life with your host, Kayla LQ. Our guest is the CEO and founder of Conscious Parenting Revolution, the creator of Guidance Approach to Parenting, a third-time TEDx speaker, and Amazon best-selling author of 7 Strategies to Keep Your Relationship with Your Kids from Hitting the Boiling Point. Through healing and reconciliation, she's helped families that suffers from disconnection to reconnect with their children's. For over 20 years, she has taught and coached thousands of parents, educators, social workers, and medical professionals in half a dozen countries through her popular workshops and coaching program, as well as TEDx Talk, 200 pages comprehensive training manual, and ebook. She's also a trained mediator, attended law school, has certification in different trauma models, teaches a breathing meditation modality with the Art of Living Foundation, and ran her own commodities trading business in Hong Kong for 30 years. Help me welcome our guest, Katherine Sellery. Welcome, Katherine.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. So, Katherine, can you tell us a little bit more about who you are and what do you do exactly?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. What I do exactly is mostly I work with parents and I help the parents who are, already great parents and want to be even better. And I help the parents who are struggling to figure out how to respond to situations. Certainly, I would say my sweet spot is more with kids that are older, a little bit older, maybe, middle school, high school, university, and later. So, not necessarily focusing on how do I get my kids to sleep sooner or how do I get them to, uh, brush their teeth and those kinds of issues. Those are not really my sweet spot. My sweet spot are when it gets a little bit trickier. They're older, we're not worrying about getting to bed. We're not worrying about, tying shoes, and we're not worrying about those kinds of things, the early years stuff. I'm talking about more the kids who are trying to figure out how do I keep connected to my inner sense of self when living in a world where everybody thinks I'm supposed to do what I'm told.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when you say, all these expectation, when you're saying that they're trying to navigate that and they're trying to, make sense out of it, what are you referring to as some of the concrete example you can explain more on what would that look like?
Yeah, sure. So, no, I won't do it. So when parents receive the no, the hard no,
Mm,
and every parent's been on the journey where they have heard the hard no, and they might get their, shackles up because they think to themselves, that wasn't really a request. That was, I'm telling you what to do.
mm,
So part of what I think the bigger conversation is around, are we telling people what to do? Is that how we communicate?
mm,
As parents, do we think that people are just supposed to do as they're told? Do we talk to other people that way or only our children that way? Or is it a wider circle that we think they just do as we tell them to do, like we're a general in the army?
mm,
Or is it more specific just to my children? They're just supposed to be obedient and compliant. And that opens up a massive can of worms around a conversation about, do we really want to train our children to be obedient and compliant to someone who has power over them?
mm,
And I, of course, don't believe that's what we want, which is why it's time for, parenting 2.0, 3.0, 4.0 around the deeper questions of why do we want people to do something in our
mm,
families? And how do we use our power? Do we use it to control younger children through having the influence? Or do we make people do what we want them to do because we think we know better than them? And it's, sort of the protective use of force. Or is it that, I have power and control and I want you to do what I want you to do when I say you're supposed to do it because I'm the mother, I'm the father. So
mm,
we're going to just kind of take the lid off why people do what they do, as opposed to just getting them to do the thing.
mm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great question I'd like to ask you. why do you do what you do? So why did you start the Conscious Parenting Revolution program in the first place, and where did it all begin?
Mm. Yeah. So, the conscious parenting revolution started when I became a parent.
Mm,
So, my son is 27, my daughter's 22 years old. And when Sam was born, he was just the nicest guy. And so we really didn't have like big issues, but there were still times when my husband and I would look at each other and just kind of be like deer in headlights. What are we going to do? Like, I know something needs to be done here. What is it we're supposed to do?
mhm,
And we know about what happened to us and what was done to us, and we didn't want to carry that forward. I definitely grew up in a family of because I said so.
mhm,
And it was that kind of iron fist sort of, situation where you just did as you're told. And if you rock the boat, you paid a really heavy price for it. And I didn't want to have that dynamic in our family. So we needed to come up with something different. So we started taking all kinds of parenting classes. And then I just realized that I was completely absorbed understanding the family dynamics. And of course, a lot of that had to do with my own family of origin and working through all of my own family of origin dynamics
mhm,
that come to the surface when you become a parent.
mhm,
They may not be at the surface for years. Maybe you end up going into your professional life and you get really busy doing all of that. Or maybe you're in school or you go down the academic route, whatever it is. It may not be quite in your face in the same way as when you become a parent, because when you
mhm,
become a parent, all of a sudden, everything that you experienced, you either replicate it and start doing it and passing it down transgenerationally. So I think that is very common.
mhm,
Or you kind of go, whoa, just a minute, I'm not sure about this. What else could I be doing? How
mhm.
else can I parent? And that's the road I went down. And it led to finding just, I think, my life's purpose.
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it. In terms of, you mentioned the consciousness part of it, which I love, is being more conscious about our action and behavior, also how we were growing up and how it affected us as our maybe, parenting style in a way that is being shaped when we have children, of course. But in that conscious level, I'd like to dive deeper into at what point did you become conscious and more aware that your parenting style needed to shift from what you had experienced growing up? Because it's like you said, it's one thing to have kids, but then one thing to realize how you want to raise these kids.
Yeah.
So, at what point did that shift for you, and what was kind of a, enlightened moment for you to want to make the shift?
It wasn't just one moment, it was a series of events, I would say. And the process of parenting and experiencing what it is to be in relationship with a child that you feel like completely responsible for, and at the same time something in you knows that you need to allow them to separate and individuate. And that consciousness around that and really consciously thinking about that for me really started kicking in because when I realized how much and the extent to which the way I was raised and the kind of communication that I was around was embedded in the idea that I was made to feel responsible for the parental figure's happiness and well-being. And if they were activated in uh, a response to something that it felt as though their response in the way that they were being was being blamed on the catalyst. Maybe it was me, maybe it was a sibling, maybe it was, something that was going on. But the way that they were activated and how they were being in it felt as though it was the responsibility of the catalyst not to have that activated within them. That was really deep programming. And so it really has taken, if I look at the arc of transition and the arc of transformation, that arc has been coming through me in learning the real lines between, where do I stop and start and where does the other stop and start in a psychic level. We can say we all belong to each other, and we do all belong to each other in a sense of, this one human race, if you will. However, there are some really distinct places in which, that really is yours. It's not about me. And the idea of blaming the catalyst for your reaction is taking absolutely no personal responsibility for your responses in life. It
Mhm.
was very mixed up in my family of origin. Maybe a lot of other people can relate to this. I'm not
Mm.
sure. And so weeding through all of that, for me, having my own children is what brought all of it up to a level of awareness
Mhm.
as the responsibility for the other, and beginning to get into the feel of when someone in my family, my children, would feel like they needed to take care of my feelings,
Mm.
or that they needed to make mommy okay, or that, how are you doing, mommy? And that those are like major alarms for me,
Mhm.
big time. Um, and it puts the burden upon the child to think they're responsible for my feelings,
Mm.
and that is ridiculous. However, that's one of those batons that are passed down through the ages from one generation to the other. I can remember my grandmother saying to my mother about me,
Mm.
she's the one, sweetheart. My mother was from the deep south. She's the one, sweetheart. She's the one that's going to take care of you. And so there was almost a spell that was being cast.
Mhm.
And the spell was literally being spoken out loud. I can remember it.
Mm.
And it makes me kind of chuckle right now. The one casting the spell, of course, was, my beloved grandmother Gaga, who I know in her heart of hearts never thought, okay, I'm casting a spell. I think she was just looking for this idea that we take care of each other's
Mhm.
lives. And everything is so nuanced. Of course I loved my mother, of course I wanted to take care of her, but not from a place of obligation,
Mhm.
duty, responsibility, but from simply the place of I love and adore you. And of course, your well-being is important to me. How can I contribute to, your life being more wonderful? So this is where we get back to the inner work and
Mhm.
recognize, like, where we're coming from is everything. One is a prison and the other one is liberation. On the outside, the actions and behaviors may look identical, but the place from within one's own soul that is giving birth to these behaviors is completely different.
Mm. Yeah. That's very wise in a sense, because it's really about who we are at the core and how we translate our experiences. As you said, they maybe are appearing in some form or shape or way, like our behavior or action, the way that we speak, and of course they're coming from a core pure essence. But through the eyes or maybe the ear of the public or other people that we love, it might be seen as maybe, no, I'll refer as a kid in this context. Sometimes kids don't have the words to express themselves, so they'll behave in certain way that we look at them and say this is inappropriate. But
Absolutely.
however, they will
Yes.
try to communicate something that's deeper and true to themselves, right?
And it's
So
sloppy.
yeah, can you elaborate more on that? And what are some of the maybe nuances that you've been, challenged with personally, maybe through your experience with children, where you were trying to understand better what was going on and you could just not understand the communication and you were like kind of challenged by it?
Yeah. So, I call it the tragic expression of the unmet need. And so when you see those behaviors that you were talking about a moment ago, then it seems as though, yeah, that is the tragic expression of the unmet need. And we tend to look at the surface and we evaluate the surface and how that person is expressing themselves, and we do the good, bad, right, wrong thing. Is it a good behavior, a bad behavior? Is it okay? Is it not okay? Is it right? Is it wrong? And this judgment, Krishnamurti said, observation without evaluation is the highest form of human intelligence. So, can I be the observer? Can I look at all behavior without putting evaluation on it? Is it neutral, or am I activated in some way into some judgment? And I know it seems really hard. Of course, it's hard. It's hard to be neutral because feelings come up for all of us. And when we're around any type of behavior, there's a different feeling. There's an atmosphere in the room
Hmm.
as well. And the tragic expressions of unmet needs are hard to be around. They're socially unacceptable usually. they tend to stir up the people around them. We have our own feelings that are activated in response to what we're seeing, which has a lot to do with what our thought processes are and where we're thinking, and pigeonholing and considering the other in our own mind. How I hear you and how I see you is my responsibility.
Hmm.
That opened my eyes to be introduced to this idea that how I see you and how I hear you is my responsibility. Like it just amazed me that I would be the one responsible for how I heard you. It again, it's that internal versus external locus of causality, which is this again a massive arc that we're moving from thinking things happen to us.
Hmm.
Do I do it or does it do me? Alan Watts used to say that. I loved listening to Alan, which I still love to do. And, does it do us or do we do it? Does it do us or do we do it? Are we the victim?
Hmm.
Right? Are we just, the ones who had shit happen to us? Or are we the creators and source of our experience? So I like to say that now I really experience myself as the source of my experience.
Hmm.
But that's a
Mhm.
life journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So, on that beautiful journey of yours that you've experienced so far, what are some of the lessons that you've taken away from this journey so far as a parent, as a, educator, as a even, um, all of these beautiful things that you've experienced? What are some of the key elements that you take away from it?
Yeah, so the life's journey. Yeah, so many key aspects. So the one that I guess helped in a very big way was this idea of recognizing what Alice Miller called being cathected.
Mm,
And so when I read Alice Miller's book, The Drama of the Gifted Child, it took me, carrying it around for 15 years before I actually cracked it open. I maybe read a page or two and, quoted a few things that she said, but it wasn't until I really took a deep dive. And that was just after my mother had passed away.
mm,
And I remember being at home in Hong Kong and walking up the stairs and seeing at the top of the stairs and thinking to myself, oh, yeah, Alice Miller, The Drama of the Gifted Child. And I pulled it down off the shelf and I sat down in my little office there at the house and I started reading it and I just never put it down. So she had the language to speak about an inner tangle within myself. So these knots that we have inside of ourselves can get so tangled and they feel as though everything is related to everything else. And so when we have these kinds of knots and we find that, that trauma, if you will,
mhm,
connects to everything about my beingness and what I'm doing on the planet and so forth. It was through, for me, it was through really connecting with that book at that time after my mother died
mhm,
and have that sense of, I understand why I couldn't read this before, because in reading it, there was that feeling of it was a betrayal.
mm,
It was a betrayal to see her in a light that she never allowed me to see her in, or that I was incapable of finding as a way to see. And it was the unraveling of being able to understand this idea of feeling completely responsible for everything about her experience, whether she consciously wanted it to be that way or not. And because, even though it was just 10 years ago, and I started my journey on the conscious parenting revolution as a trainer and a coach 25 years ago. So it was late in my own development to finally get this last piece, the
mm,
piece around separation and individuation, the piece around it's okay and it's not rocking the boat for you to have your own voice and to be empowered to stay connected to your own voice, even though it's not that of your caregiver. And that's not what we generally create as an ecosystem within our families. And that's what I'm a stand for. That's
mm,
what the conscious parenting revolution really ultimately is about, is being able to create the dynamic within our families for our children to feel empowered to not take care of their parents' feelings, to feel empowered that if I have a feeling that I want to give voice to, that I won't be treated as though I'm a betrayer and that my job is simply to mirror back your experience to you, parent,
Mm,
as opposed to being able to say, your experience of this situation is different from mine. And I have the courage and I've been given the ecosystem to speak up and speak about it and not be considered disobedient, disrespectful, disloyal, and somehow a bad person for
mm,
having a different voice other than my caregivers.
mm. It gave me chill, and I was kind of my eyes were starting to water here because it's so true. It's so true, and I think this is beautiful, and it sends, you're truly inspiring to me.
Mm,
And more
thank you.
people need to start looking, even if you're not a parent yet, it's the work
Oh,
starts with you. It starts with at home, and I call
it
it
does.
home,
Yeah. You
so
get to parent your own inner child.
yes, and I think in some form and shape and way, we all have, the responsibility to raise ourselves, to kind of understand that if we don't do the work for ourselves first, this
Yeah.
will have repercussion and negative impact on,
Yes.
generations to come. So kudos to you
Yes.
for vocalizing it and taking a stand for all the people who hasn't yet quite or understood
Yeah.
um, what that involves as a society, as a individual first, and then the impact that it has in its community and overall, globally as well. So kudos to you.
Yeah. Thank
Kudos.
you so much. I say in my training, set your children free. And,
Mm.
the way to do that, of course, is we have to set ourselves free.
Hmm.
And what are we setting ourselves free from? We're setting ourselves free from these dysfunctional patterns that lead to dysfunctional responses that are all couched in a land of unconsciousness. It's not like anybody wakes up and says, I'm going to protect my child today by forcing them to mirror back to me only and not allowing them to separate and individuate and blame them for my feelings. Nobody does that.
Mm.
However, we live it.
Yes.
And the wake up that's required, and I know waking up and woke is, it's a thing now. It's a
Mm.
brand new thing, incidentally. So I I love the fact that it's a thing. I love the
Hmm.
fact that we're waking up to these irrational unconscious beliefs and patterns that have cathected us and or duped us for generations, because it is as though these spells have been cast, and they've been cast across humanity. And whether it's the patriarchy or even the matriarchy, there are these archetypes, and they can be incredibly powerful. The tribe and the ways in which the tribe mentality makes it so dangerous for someone to speak that, or give words to or voice to something that is outside of what is acceptable to the tribe.
Mm.
And the power of the tribe to shut that down makes it really hard to be able to raise and crack and break and through. And, it's kind of like,
Mm.
what does it take for the chick to come out of the shell?
Hmm.
And, and you know, through my own journey, I learned that these tangled webs inside, they're 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 sometimes so strong and so powerful we become merged with them.
Hmm.
In other words, we lose our sense of self because the something in us is so powerful and so strong that we can't think of ourselves as being anything other than them.
Hmm.
And when that happens, we don't have the ability to be with that something because we are identified with the something. And then when we identify with the something, all of its strategies in order to take care of itself are, codependent, and they tend to involve, latching onto someone else as the hero in my story, in a story, so that that person becomes the one who's going to be our resurrection.
Mm.
And nobody's at fault. It's a no fault, no blame, no guilt, no shame moment. Nobody's at fault. It just happens. It's all just happening. It's unfolding. And the responsibility is the only thing that we can ultimately come to, is just finally being able to heal ourselves enough so that we can be responsible for the fact that these are not healthy patterns.
Mhm.
and these webs inside can be unraveled. We can be with them. We
Mhm.
can begin to create enough space so that we can turn toward them, listen deeply for what they were relationally hoping for at the time that the traumas were happening, that the relational relationships didn't happen. And they're still
Mm.
craving and recreating them over and over again in our lives so that it can
Mhm.
happen. And that's that interplay between the inside and the outside, and back to Alan Watts, do we do it or does it do us? Do
Mm.
we do it or does it do us? Like, how are we the ones who are creating and source of our experience and at the same time not be aware that we're even doing it because it's all deep impressions
Mhm.
for which we actually had no choice.
Mm.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Undifferentiated consciousness. It's like it's just happening. We're in that whole milieu, and what is there, and the impressions are being created in our psyche. And now we're at the place where, back to the parenting journey, we are either coming just unconsciously allowing all of it to flow through into our own dynamics with our children, or something happens.
Mm. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd like to ask you this, and I don't know that maybe had this experience, but I would imagine that by trying to help others, as you said before and we mentioned before, it starts home, it starts with you. But as you speak the truth, as you speak your truth, at least, and what you see as wanting, to change, or things that you want to see in the world happening, have you been feeling the pressure, or maybe, the pressure of the, I'll quote unquote here, the society or tribe, to try to shut you down, or tame you in some form or way or shape that is beyond your control, but that has impacted your view, your voice, your opinion, and it has challenged your own inner, maybe, confidence to show up and just be more assertive, more vocalizing your inner beliefs.
Yeah, interesting. I do have some memories of when I know I have chosen not to speak up, where there was something in me that wanted to be said that wasn't said because I knew that it would have an impact.
Mm,
And I wasn't prepared to just be impervious to that.
mm,
And I think that happens less and less.
mhm,
But I'm still consciously aware that there are times when there's something that needs to be said, and that no one outside of me silences me. I silence myself. And, that's curious because, I'm, when we talk about people who do a lot of personal work, I can't think of a whole lot of people who haven't done as much as I have. And it's like, wow, it's at least I'm the observer of this something
mm,
that is silenced because of the concern still, even after all these years, about how that's going to land and what the price is that I'm going to get to pay.
mm,
How's it going to land and what's the price that I'm going to get to pay? So there is the interchange between, am I willing to betray myself
mm,
in order not to pay that price? Or will I not betray myself and let the chips fall where they may because I will be a stand for my sense of something,
mhm,
that deeper sense of something. That doesn't mean that we don't have some discernment, and that there's also the ability to be, like, okay, is this the right time to say this? Something has to be said. Maybe I'll notice that this might not be the best time, and there's
mm,
an opportunity to come back to this later. I'd like to say that the real freedom happens for us when we can be authentic
mm,
all of the time, regardless of how it may land, and stop protecting ourselves from other people's being triggered,
mhm,
because we can't go through life protecting other people from being triggered, because the triggering is coming from something inside, just so we understand it. So if in this moment someone is being triggered and they're in an overreaction, What they're actually responding to is not even this moment. It's just that this moment has activated something that is unresolved. And it's the unresolved something that's bubbling up to the surface right now through this extreme behavior on their part. It has nothing really to do with the moment that we're in because they're experiencing something from the past. And of course, it's all outside of their control anyway, because it's just a non volitional response. However, going back to this idea of where we started earlier, if you have grown up in a family system which has made you responsible for other people's overreactions and for other people's activated, manipulative and abusive behavior, it may not be as clear
Mm.
to be able to recognize that no, this isn't about me. And, I'm not going to keep dancing like the dance that's required of me in order to keep this other person from being activated. So, it's that whole idea that I'm not responsible for your over responses.
And it's powerful what you shared because I recognize that maybe more and more in the era, I can call it the era that we're in, um, with technology and access to resources and all of the books out there and everything, that's available to us, I find it still hard to believe that people are still struggling as they were before, um, and have so much unresolved traumas or previous experiences that makes or creates other negative experience for others. So
Mhm.
as you said, it's our entire responsibility to, how we understand and how we receiving the information, right? You said
Mhm.
earlier, like it's not other people's responsibilities to make us understand, but it's our responsibility to take ownership of our place here and understand people.
We're in a dance. We're in a dance. And, the dance in these relationships, all these relationships, family relationship, friendship relationships, all of these relationships, they're all a dance.
Hmm.
And I think that, in the family context, I can remember at one stage something my mother had said about, it's always the mother's fault. It's always the mother's fault, feeling, somehow accused
Mm.
because there wasn't any way to I want to say disidentify, like,
Mm.
okay, maybe in that role that I mean, it's just a massive role.
Mhm.
It's just a massive role. And it's easy for, and I just kind of want to say this out loud. It's so easy for us to go into blame and shame and guilt and all the rest of it if we make mistakes as moms or dads.
Mm.
And I want to say self compassion is really a good practice because we only can do as well as we can do. And I
Mm.
do think that, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And that's, that again is not a blame shame comment, but we can think that we're doing the best we can. And it, in fact, is doing lots of harm.
Mhm.
And the journey, call it the hero's journey. The hero's journey is to be able to come and awaken to this and be able to go, oh my gosh, of course I never would have done this intentionally. Harm was never my plan. And yet things have happened and harm has been done. And now again, it's my opportunity to just be responsible for my the spells that I was under that I didn't know I was under, for my responses to situations, for my own being catalyzed. So this is where all of the, beautiful shadow work comes in, where we begin to see what we can't see within ourselves around the corners, to begin to just recognize every time that we're in an overreaction that there's a space here for us to be able to go, wow, what's being catalyzed within me? And what is it that I'm hiding from so much, like not being willing to integrate into my psyche? What is it that I've split off and away from?
Mhm.
And it's all just happening. It's all just unveiling. I mean, there are different approaches to this. And I do love shadow work and I love breakthrough. And, that's one of my go tos. And I'm also as you mentioned in my bio, I also teach a breathing meditation with the Art of Living Foundation, where really the teacher there says we just need to release the
Mm,
impressions in the mind. We just release them. We don't need to go through the garbage.
mm,
And I really appreciate that as well. That, this idea of going through the garbage can be so time consuming and not necessarily the way to release the garbage. So if we can just release and release and release the impressions in the mind, and through that ability cleanse ourselves. I love therapy. I mean, therapy is amazing. So I think that there's also a place for therapy, and I believe there's a place for the shadow work, and I believe there's a place for the breathing and meditation that just releases the impressions. I've been in a couple of different, spiritual communities in my life, and what I've noticed is that there is a tendency to go into what we call spiritual bypass.
mhm,
And that's just this idea that I have the idealized state of what should be. And I could probably read chapter and verse and lecture on the shoulds around how we should be living. And that's not getting us any closer to actually experiencing our experience and really going into the feelings, not from the perspective of I am my feelings, but from the perspective of feelings want to be felt. And they tend to just be like, nope, I'm not leaving until you grieve. I'm not
mm,
leaving until you experience this. And
mhm,
so go in as the observer and embody and release without getting hung up. And,
mhm,
like setting up your living room there and hanging out there and staying, in that space, right?
mhm. Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. That was a very beautiful, beautiful way to put it. And that I love that. It's more about the release than holding on to it and just trying to stick with the garbage. Really, it's about releasing the garbage. So I love it. Katherine, as we come to an end, what's one piece of advice that you could leave our listeners with on how to live their most authentic life?
How to live their most authentic life. Um, be present to yourself. Be present to yourself. What does that mean to be present to yourself? To be able to be present to yourself, you have to really stay in that relationship of being the observer and noticing what you notice so that you can be like, oh, there is something in me that's wanting to be heard. There is something in me that's wanting to speak up. There is something in me, this, that, and the other thing. So when we have that sense of being present to ourselves, it's like, okay, I'm in a situation, I've got something going on here, and how can I be attending to what's coming up for me in this dance that we have with the outer world in a way in which I can live my values, right? And so it depends on what your values are.
Mhm,
So it's kind of that combination of the inner and the outer world dance, being authentic and present, but not from that place of duty and responsibility, but from that place of freedom and liberation
mhm.
and love, and kindness. And yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know if that's a good enough answer, but that's what comes to me right now.
That's a great answer. Thank you so much for sharing that. Katherine, if people want to stay in touch with you and learn more about your the conscious parenting revolution and all the good work that you're doing out in the world, where can they find you at?
Yeah. Consciousparentingrevolution.com is the website. So please go there and there'll be, ways for you to either sign up for a newsletter or watch some of our webinars or get in touch with me through the website if you want to do any work together, or if you're looking for my parenting classes, you can find that on the website too.
Beautiful. So I'll make sure to put the links in the comments below so people can reach you more efficiently and directly and get started on their journey to become more conscious parents into the world. So thank you so much for being here and for
Thank
your time.
you.
It was an honor to have you on the
It was
podcast today.
lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If you like this episode, make sure to subscribe and share it with your friends and family. Also, Head on over to our website, embraceyourlifepodcast.com, to learn more about how you can live your most authentic life. Thank you for listening, and until next time, remember to embrace your life.